70s rock icon you've never heard of.
He's my most memorable artist.
Bob Dylan was mild to this guy.
Sugar man, won't you hurry? 'Cause I'm tired of these scenes.
How many records do you think he sold in America?
In America, 6.
And they did absolutely nothing.
Unless you were from South Africa.
It was one of the most famous records of all time. This album had in it lyrics that set us free.
Who was Sixto Rodriguez?
There were no concrete cold facts about the artist known as Rodriguez.
Was he alive or dead?
It just added to this mythology of him.
Join two music fans as they solve rock's greatest mystery.
We found him, we found him. He's alive and living in Detroit.
It wouldn't have been nice to know that you were a superstar.
Nothing beats reality.
And the best part was still to come.
Searching for Sugar Man, Saturday at 9 on TVO.
It really felt like you were in India, and that's why it was coined Little India.
What does Canada look like from the heart of a vibrant South Asian community?
It makes me proud to be who I am, that society's embracing different cultures.
There has been a gentrification been going on. I mean, even if it's not South Asian in culture, I still think it's good for the street.
No matter what your background is, we're all connected. And then all that coming together creates a fantastic energy.
Little India, tonight at 9 on TVO.
Model.
In Lee Miller's eyes, there is a flame there that is ignited when you see those photographs.
Photographer.
Lee desperately wants to cover the war.
She became a photojournalist.
I hope no one will ever forget the subject matter of those pictures.
Artist.
She didn't let any of the conventions of being a woman hold her back.
Icon.
Women like her blazed a trail.
Capturing Lee Miller, tomorrow at 9 on TVO.
Ontario Real Estate Association is proud to sponsor TVO. Ontario's 90,000 realtors are dedicated to finding a home for every Ontarian. The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
First impressions matter, but as last night's leaders' debate reminded us, so do second, third, and all the other impressions after that. Tonight, we'll dive into why presentation and style can, but don't always, trump substance. First up, Ontario Green Party leader Mike Schreiner is here to discuss his first province-wide leaders' debate and his pitch to voters. It's Tuesday, May 17th, and that's ahead on the agenda. In the last legislative session at Queen's Park, there was but one lone Green Party of Ontario MPP. And if you watched the Ontario leaders' debate, you would have seen him make history as the first fourth party leader to take a place on that stage. Mike Schreiner has led his party since 2009, and in the last election became the first Green to sit at the Pink Palace. He's hoping to have a larger caucus after this election. Mike Schreiner is running for re-election in the riding of Guelph, and he joins us now. It's good to see you again.
Hey, Steve, it's always a pleasure to be here.
It's been a whole 12 hours, I think, since I've seen you.
Yeah, I was just here.
Okay, you did make history, as we suggested last night, in as much as this was the first time in a province-wide televised debate that there were 4 leaders on stage instead of 3. What do you think you brought to that debate stage that was different enough to warrant your inclusion this time?
Well, first of all, I believe we earned our inclusion. The debate consortium said you have to elect an MPP and you need to have a full slate of candidates, and we accomplished that and made history last night. But I think I brought a level of honesty and authenticity to the debate that was really appealing to viewers, and I think that's been a big part of the feedback I've received. And I also think there were some issues that were brought up last night that maybe wouldn't have been talked about as much. One, the climate crisis, which I think I was the only leader to really talk about it until the very last question that you brought up towards the end of the debate. And the other one is poverty. Nobody else really talked about poverty until I brought up the fact that the Ontario Greens are looking to double social assistance rates to end legislative poverty in this province. And those are 2 important issues that I think need to be a part of the political conversation here in Ontario.
People are going to be considering over the next period of time, couple of weeks, who they want to put their ex beside on Election Day. And I do hear this when I'm out there on the hustings. I hear people say, why should I vote for Green? You guys aren't going to be the next government. Is it a wasted vote? Could you address that to people who are wondering whether it is a wasted vote to give it to you?
It's not a wasted vote to vote for the Ontario you want. If you want green, vote green. And we've seen what a huge influence even one green MPP can make. Many media commentators, I think maybe even including yourself, Steve, have said I punch well above my weight at Queen's Park and have an outsized influence. Imagine what we can accomplish with 2 or 3 green MPPs, and we've seen that in other provinces. So British Columbia, 3 green MLAs held the balance of power in a minority government. In PEI, the Greens are the official opposition in a minority government. So we believe we have an opportunity to maximize our influence to improve the lives of Ontarians.
Can you give us one issue where you think your being in that legislative chamber made a difference to what otherwise might have happened?
Yeah, you know, Doug Ford proposed a ministerial zoning order to build an Amazon warehouse on the Duffins Creek wetland. I immediately spoke out against it and really led and sparked a citizens movement against it until that ministerial zoning order was pulled. I'll give you one other example. In the early days of the Ford government, they said they were going to reopen the Greenbelt Act and potentially allow development in the Greenbelt and review the Clean Water Act and partly undermine the Clean Water Act. Again, literally the minute that legislation was introduced, I was up at Queen's Park speaking out against it. And again, we built a citizens movement, and the Ford government backtracked on that schedule of the bill and said, you know what? Hands off development in the Greenbelt. And quite frankly, other than Mr. Ford wanting to build his highways through the Greenbelt, they have said nothing about doing development in the Greenbelt, and I think it's because of a firm opposition led by one Green MPP.
Well, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the debate because you were there, but here's a little bit of it. Sheldon, if you would.
The Bradford bypass. When a golf course donor said, hey, we don't want it through our golf course, he rerouted it around them. He will roll out the red carpets for the Amazons of the world and the big box stores of the world. But when it comes to supporting local farmers, he'll pave over their farmland, hurting our economy. When it comes to protecting us from flooding and the climate change, he'll pave over the wetlands that clean our drinking water and protect us.
Schreiner?
First time. Were you nervous?
I was a little nervous going into it, I'll have to be honest with you, but I think a little nerves are good because it keys you up and gives you the energy you need and sometimes the focus you need on what you want to accomplish when you're on the stage.
I was impressed about the fact that when I asked that question at the end about what's the decision you regret the most in public life, frankly, you were the only guy who really gave a thoughtful, heartfelt answer about wishing you had run in Guelph from the beginning as opposed to all the way along. You didn't get a heads up on that question, right? So where'd that come from?
You know, it came from the heart. I would say almost everything I said last night came from the heart. And I think people are hungry for a politician who's authentic and is honest. And, you know, just saying that, you know, I made a strategic mistake in the 2011 election, and I learned from that mistake.
And now you're the MPP for Guelph.
And now I'm the
you were
MPP
the
for
MPP
Guelph.
for Guelph, seeking re-election there. Let's talk about your platform. And Sheldon, if you would, can we bring this graphic up? Because the Greens, of course, it's been many years since they were only a party about the environment. They have lots of other things on offer as well. For example, a desire to increase mental health spending to 10% of the healthcare budget. They'd hire 15,000 nurses, increase funding to home care services by 20%, cap class sizes for kindergarten at 26 and from grades 4 to 8 at 24, close the health outcome gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations, double ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program rates, and tie future increases to the rate of inflation, cut public transit fares in half for 3 months, fund retrofits for provincially owned buildings, implement congestion charges, and to make business carbon-free, include output-based pricing. And I want to start with that last one, because I got a feeling that is hugely important and that nobody understands what it means. So what's an output-based pricing system?
Yeah, so basically when you bring in carbon pricing, you have certain industries that are particularly what would be called trade exposed. So they compete in global markets, and we might lose those businesses to other jurisdictions.
Like what, steel?
Cement is a classic example when the BC carbon price was brought in. So you make adjustments in the carbon pricing to rebate money back to those companies to help them do things in the case of cement, fuel switching to, become fossil fuel free, or in the case of steel, moving to electric arc furnaces. And so it's a way to recognize that you want those businesses to survive and not go somewhere else.
And how would you help them do that?
Yeah, by returning rebate money to them so they can do things like be able to afford to bring in electric steel arc furnaces, for example, or to allow for fuel switching in the cement sector so they can drive fossil fuels out of their heating processes.
Any sense about how much that would cost?
Yeah, you know what? The exact details for each one, I'm not going to tell you that because I don't know their businesses. But, you know, in some cases, it's looking at hundreds of millions of dollars for sure.
And can they afford to do it?
Absolutely. You're already starting to see it happen with Dofasco Steel, for example, and the cement industry has been coming to Queen's Park for years now, even just asking for regulatory changes that would enable them to do fuel switching, even without the financial incentives and supports.
Now, in some respects, the debate last night was between the three opposition people and Doug Ford. But in another respect, last night's debate was also to kind of figure out who was going to be the champion of the progressive parties, right? Which has nothing to do with Ford, but everything to do with Horvath, Del Duca, and Schreiner. So let me ask this. All of you three progressive parties are kind of pitching many similar things: more nurses, more teachers, retrofitting homes, building more schools, a break on public transit, subsidizing the purchase of electric vehicles, and you bikes as well, cleaning up the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, how does the Green Party distinguish its offer from what the other two parties are also pitching, which in many cases is very similar?
Yeah, it's leading with new solutions to old problems. And, you know, sometimes I've joked in the past, probably in some interviews with you, Steve, where I've said, you know, the other parties can, you know, steal some of our ideas because we're about getting things done to improve the lives of the people of Ontario. I don't think I've ever seen stealing of ideas in real time like I've seen over this campaign.
What do you mean?
And let me give you a couple of examples. So we were the first to put out a housing affordability strategy that Toronto, or Canada's largest circulation daily newspaper, called a masterclass plan in delivering the housing affordability solutions Ontarians needs. I believe the NDP now has updated their platform 3 times to try to match what the Greens are doing. Mr. Del Duca has said, you know what, the Greens had, in his convention speech, the Greens have the best housing strategy. We might as well just adopt most of it. Now, unfortunately, neither one of those two parties have gone as far as we've gone, but they've certainly adopted many elements. We're the first party that brought forward a standalone mental health strategy in Ontario's history. Not too long after that, the NDP brought one out, almost matching us. The only difference being, we told people how we would pay for it by canceling Doug Ford's license sticker gimmick and using that money to fund mental health. The NDP wasn't quite so clear about that. And then we came out early in the, well, actually I've been calling for over a year now, but we came out aggressively in the campaign calling for the doubling of social assistance rates to end legislative poverty in Ontario. Poverty costs this province $33 billion a year, to force people to literally live, in the case of people with disabilities, on $1,100 a month. It's simply impossible. We've moved all three parties on this one. Even Doug Ford, who brought out a budget a few weeks ago, freezing social assistance rates, was forced to say, you know what, we'll raise them 5%. I think the Liberals have said 10% and 10% for a total of 20. And the NDP once again amended their platform, going from, I believe it was a 20 to 40% increase to now matching us, not in the first year, but in the second year. I mean, we have seen in real time over the last year, as we've all been gearing up for this campaign, what a huge influence the Ontario Greens are making, will continue to make, and that's exactly why we need more Green MPPs at Queen's Park.
Do you have the luxury of being able to sort of open that Overton window even more? Because as you yourself have acknowledged, you're not going to be the next Premier of Ontario, so you can make promises that are not necessarily rooted in reality. That's an unfair way to put it, but you know what I'm getting at.
We can offer bold promises that are rooted in reality. And I would say, for instance, our climate plan is the most detailed, most ambitious yet doable plan that any political party in Ontario has ever brought forward to show how we can cut climate pollution in half by 2030 and be fully net zero by 2045 using existing technology. So there's no pie in the sky, oh, if we develop this innovation or that innovation, will solve the crisis. We've actually shown how we can do it through detailed modeling in ways that can help people save money by saving energy, and in ways that can set Ontario up to be a global leader in the emerging markets of the new climate economy, which many economists are predicting there's going to be 75 million jobs created in low-carbon, new climate economy industries between now and 2030. The question is, will Ontario lead or we will follow? We believe Ontario is well-positioned to lead if we have the political policies in place like what the Greens are offering.
There are 124 MPPs at Queen's Park, and you were the only one to vote against the license sticker rebate. And, well, okay, a couple questions emerging out of this. Why?
Because it makes absolutely no sense to give people a break on their license plates in a way that disproportionately benefits wealthy households who own lots of vehicles and drain billions of dollars out of our public treasury that need to go to healthcare, education, and fixing affordable housing. The pandemic has revealed significant cracks in the foundation, particularly of our systems of care in Ontario. We have to fix that foundation, not paper over it. We're going to need resources to do that. And, you know, giving car drivers a break when you're not giving non-car drivers a break, you're not giving people who can't afford to own a car a break, you're not giving people who maybe for environmental reasons don't have a car a break. Most Ontarians I've talked to, and we're talking Conservative, Liberal, NDP across the political spectrum, feel offended. I call it a gimmick, you call it a rebate. But most of the people I've talked to said, and what I've replied to them saying is, we want to earn your vote, not buy your vote, and people see through these kinds of election gimmicks.
I think the NDP and the Liberals actually agree with you on the substance of the thing, but we're terrified at the politics of the thing. That if they didn't back up this tax rebate/gimmick, let's use both of our expressions, that Doug Ford would call them out on it and they would be politically vulnerable. Why don't you feel the same way?
Well, he called me out on it last night during the debate. He said on more than one occasion that, you know, Mike Schreiner wants to raise taxes and fees on people. And, you know, I was very clear in the debate, and I've been very clear since then, that we're going to ask upper income Ontarians to pay a bit more. And that's for, you know, people who earn over $200,000 a year. It's people who maybe have the ability to afford 6 or 7 cars. It's the people who have high incomes and are getting electricity rebates. We're saying, you know what? You should pay a little bit more so we can fix the foundations of our systems of care that were particularly revealed during the pandemic. We owe it to elders to fix long-term care and ensure that we put people before profits. We owe it to healthcare workers to treat them with the dignity and respect and the fair wages they deserve so they can care for us. We owe it to young people in this province to ensure that we have properly funded public schools. We owe it to a whole generation of young folks who are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home to have a housing affordability strategy. And we're saying that the billions that Ford removed from the provincial treasury with the license plate sticker gimmick should be there to fund the things Ontarians want and need.
You mentioned the electricity rebates, and I want to raise that with you because I've talked to a number of guests on this program about that. And I'll set it up by saying this. I earn a 6-figure salary, and Toronto Hydro sends me a check for $9 every month to help me pay my electricity bill. Now, I don't happen to think that makes any sense at all. This is a policy brought in by the previous government of Kathleen Wynne. How much do we subsidize? What does the taxpayer subsidize electricity? It's like $6-7 billion a year, isn't it? Something like that?
$6.9 billion a year, which just once again shows you how these election gimmicks, because in some ways you could argue the Liberals brought that in as an election gimmick to deal with the fact that rising electricity prices were a political threat to them, how the costs associated with these balloon out of control. We're now spending $6.9 billion a year for the CEO of Rogers, the CEO of Hydro One, the host of The Agenda to get a check back. I asked the Financial Accountability Officer to do an analysis by demographics on this. Wealthy Ontarians receive a 30% higher on average benefit than low and middle income Ontarians do on these rebates. So we're saying keep supports in place for people who live in rural communities because we know prices are higher there and in remote communities, and keep the subsidies in place for low and middle income Ontarians, but upper income earners, they can pay their electricity bill, especially when there are so many people in our province who don't even have a home to live in right now.
This seems obvious to me on the face of it, and yet I see none of the parties, except for you, running on the issue of means testing is probably not the right word, but you can come up with a better expression for that. Making it geared to income, on paying subsidies on electricity. Why is nobody running on this? You'd think actually a populist premier would want to run on something like this. Why isn't it happening?
It seems like it'd be the perfect thing for Mr. Ford to run on. Like the $6 million man even gets an electricity subsidy. I don't know why the other parties are unwilling to talk about this, but Steve, if you look at most of these, so when it comes to electricity subsidies and when it comes to the license sticker rebates, wealthy households receive a disproportionately high part of the benefit, and lower and middle income households receive a lower proportion of the benefit. And it's nothing against wealthy individuals. I want people to be successful in Ontario. I want to be really clear about that. But right now, we clearly need to make some investments in improving our public services, making housing more affordable, preparing ourselves for the climate emergency. And I think we need some tax fairness to ensure that wealthier individuals aren't getting subsidized when there are literally people in Ontario right now who can't afford to own a home.
You made a little news here for me, incidentally, in as much as when Peter Weltman, the Financial Accountability Officer, was on the program when we talked about this, he said an MPP asked me to do the study, but he wouldn't tell me who. It's you.
It was me.
You were the one who asked. Okay, good to know. I want to know about, let me put it this way. You were first out the gate, I think, in terms of offering the public a break on transit fares, offering to reduce the cost of riding transit by 50% for 3 months. But then the Liberals got out there with Buck a Ride province-wide, which you got to admit sounds a lot sexier. And I wonder whether you think they have superseded and bypassed your plan as a result.
We're prioritizing solutions over slogans, quite frankly. So first of all, I really want to ask the Liberals to do their math on the accounting on that, because somehow ours cutting it in half, we've costed it as costing the province more than them to going to Buck a Ride. So either we're overestimating how much it's going to cost, or they're underestimating how much it's going to cost.
They've said $700 million the first year and $1 billion the second year. And then
our costing is $1.2 billion a year to cut them in half. That's what we got working with transit agents. So I think they're underestimating the cost. But that aside, there are two things that factor in people using transit. So one is affordability, which I believe we're addressing and the Liberals are addressing as well. The other one is service and reliability. And if you drain too many resources out of the system, then you look at service and reliability cutbacks, which deter people from taking transit. Our goal is to triple transit use by 2030. And in order to do that, we're going to have to ramp up investment, not only in expanding transit services through LRTs and subways and all of that, but also in the most fiscally responsible and quickest way, which we're the only ones talking about doing, is dedicated bus lines. The fastest way to really ramp up transit, particularly intercity transit, is through buses. So for example, I live in Guelph. It's 2022. I cannot take a bus from Guelph to Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph to Hamilton, Guelph to Cambridge, Guelph to Brantford. I can't get an express bus to Toronto. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to me. So it's going to take investment to ensure that we expand services, and we also have to make sure those services are reliable, because if you're paying $1 and you're waiting 45 minutes for a bus, you're not a happy person. Right. If you're paying half price and you're waiting 10 minutes for that bus, I think you're a happier person.
Okay. We got a few minutes to go here, and I want to just a few political questions before we finish up. Annamie Paul was the leader of the federal Greens, and she made quite a name for herself, trying to get that party. Anyway, we won't go into the ancient history here. Suffice to say, I remember there was a moment where I thought maybe the two of you were going to have a conversation to see whether she would run for you in this election. Did that conversation take place?
You know what? I've had conversations with Annamie just post her federal political career. She made it very clear to me that she needs a break from politics, and I fully respect that. And so I did not ask her to run, but she made it very clear to me before I even had a chance to have that conversation that she needed a break from politics.
So that was not on regardless. Okay, got it. Second thing is, okay, let's go to Parry Sound Muskoka here, because you're the one Green MPP, and you mentioned in the debate last night that if people living in Parry Sound Muskoka are watching this, vote for your guy, because I guess you think Matt Richter's got the second best chance to be the second Green MPP there. There's no Liberal running in that riding because their candidate had to drop out. I'm betting you're going to get a good chunk of that Liberal vote that would otherwise have gone to them. But that's one of the safest Tory seats in the whole province. They got more than 50% of the votes there last time. So your guy in the last election got 20%. That's a big amount of ground to make up. Can you really win that seat?
Well, you know what? 2018 in Guelph feels a lot like 2022 in Parry Sound Muskoka. A lot of people in Guelph said Mike Schreiner won't win because Guelph is a safe Liberal seat. until it wasn't a safe Liberal seat. And the momentum Matt Richter has right now, I've been really struck by the actually level of anger from folks around this whole license sticker gimmick thing, where people are saying to Matt, you know what, here's my $120. I've never voted Green, but we want politicians to come out here and earn our vote, not buy our vote. And there's a lot of people who, in that riding, who are struggling around finding an affordable place to call home. And our housing affordability strategy really speaks to those folks. A lot of people, particularly in the tourism industry, that have been hit hard by the pandemic, and our steadfast support for supporting small businesses and ensuring they get the supports they need. You know, for instance, Mr. Ford, you know, in the pandemic, left big box stores open and close small businesses. Like, never again should we allow that to happen. And so having a Green Party that's championing climate action, championing housing affordability, championing support for small businesses and the people who, you know, live in ridings like Parry Sound Muskoka and across the province, we're feeling momentum, I think, especially coming out of our debate performance last night. But we have other great candidates. Diane Sachs here in University Rosedale. I look at Carla Johnson in Cambridge, Laura Campbell and Dufferin Caledon. Strong candidates all across the province that we're really excited about.
That's Mike Schreiner. He's the leader of the Green Party, seeking votes and re-election in the riding of Guelph. Thanks for coming into TVO tonight and doing this with us. We appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, Steve. Anytime.
Whether we like it or not, in this day and age, it seems that good judgment, ethical conduct, and new ideas aren't enough to have a successful political career. Performance skills matter a lot. Voters want politicians to be able to connect with them through television or social media. Is personally awkward behavior off-putting, and will it cost you votes? Let's explore that. And as is our custom here, we'll introduce our guests from furthest away to closest to our studio, starting in Kingston, Ontario, with Kathy Brock, Professor and Senior Fellow in the School of Policy Studies and the Department of Political Studies at Queen's University. In Bobcaygeon, Ontario, Lynn Whittam, former Queen's Park reporter, now a management consultant and professor at George Brown and Centennial Colleges. In Ontario's capital city, in the East End, former Toronto City Councillor and mayoral candidate Karen Stintz, now president and CEO of Variety, the children's charity. And in Midtown Toronto, Martin Regcon, Queen's Park columnist for the Toronto Star, and we're delighted to welcome you four back to our airwaves tonight. You've now all had a chance to see the four major party leaders on the hustings. You've seen them make announcements. We've had a couple of leaders' debates. Is there one leader in particular that you believe their performance skills are head and shoulders above everybody else's? Lynn, why don't you start us off?
Hi, Steve. I think so, and I think it was demonstrated last night quite well, and that's Mike Schreiner. When you think about leadership and the qualities that one has to demonstrate in this kind of format, authenticity, empathy, and a recent study from Auckland University and the University of Calgary just a year ago indicated also a sense of collaboration and likability are the key qualities to demonstrate in a political campaign and definitely in a debate. And he did really well in that category. His empathy, that question, have you, Mr. Ford, have you talked to a nurse? Demonstrated his understanding. His ability also to show that he was collaborative just by how he reacted physically to different leaders in that split screen situation, also was very, very effective. So I would say thus far that he really is demonstrating that quality that both media and voters like to see in a leader.
All right, there's one vote for the Green leader, Mike Schreiner. Karen Stintz, you've done this before. As a mayoral candidate, you've participated in these kinds of all candidates debates. So tell me, is there one leader that you've seen on the hustings so far who has impressed you more than all the others?
Well, it's hard, as you know, Steve, when you're doing these kinds of debates, it's hard to get your message out. It's hard to put on a good performance. And as you know, that there is the ability for politicians to connect one-to-one, the ability for politicians to connect one to the many. And I would say that Doug Ford continues to be able to excel at connecting to the one-to-many. That he has a message that seems to resonate with the masses. And I would say he's also probably the most authentic to himself. He doesn't try to be overly articulate. In fact, you wonder sometimes whether he chooses the language that he does so that he can be seen to be, one of the guys. But he, I saw him last night in the debate, and he was serious at times. He was trying to be chummy at other times, and he was actually, reached across the aisle to Mike Schreiner. And so I thought he was the most able to articulate his message because he seemed to be the one that was most comfortable in the delivery of his message.
Kathy Brock, in terms of performance skills, any one of them any much better than all the rest?
Actually, Steve, I would have a tie between Doug Ford and Mike Schreiner. Both of them spoke well. Mike Schreiner came across as very forthright. He reacted honestly. He was frank when he answered questions. So that came across very positively. And that's what voters are looking for, someone who's real. In the same way, Doug Ford came out. He was very positive in his opening remarks. He repeated the word yes a number of times, and get it done, his slogan, but it's a slogan that seems to work. But what struck me most was when Doug Ford was asked about the pandemic, and he said it was the most challenging time of his life, and that he would never wish this on another premier, and he will ensure it never happens, ever. And he added that ever, and that was genuine.
MRC, what say you?
Well, I agree with everyone that Mike Schreiner was head and shoulders above the rest. He has been, it's interesting, this was his first televised provincial debate. And so he, in that sense, he was a rookie because he didn't have the seat before that led him onto the stage. He didn't have the seat in the legislature. But he's been leader for 13 years. People don't realize that. He's been leader as long as Andrea Horwath has been leader of the NDP. He's been leader of the Greens. And so you had a tale of two 13-year leaders, one of whom didn't seem to have the energy or the connection to viewers last night. It was interesting that Andrea Horwath talked a few times. She likes to tell that anecdote. I met Kathy on the assembly line last week. I met so-and-so at childcare. I met Eve at the school, or the nurse. And yet she wasn't actually connecting with viewers last night. Didn't have the energy, didn't have the emotion. Let's talk about emotion for half a second here, because that's something that Doug Ford delivers on. And although you can sometimes have too much of a good thing, too much positivity, and it begins to sound a bit phony. I love nurses. I love educators. I love firefighters. I love first responders. At a certain point, Mike Schreiner was able to call him out on that. And do you actually talk to nurses? Do you hear what they're saying to you? But clearly, on the emotional front, Mike Schreiner is connected. And let me just quickly say, he was passionate. But he was more sad than mad. He wasn't angry when he attacked the Doug Ford or even Del Duca or Horwath. He went after everybody last night, and yet you would think he was Mr. Nice Guy. Very interesting ability to do that.
All right, we've got you all weighing in now on whose performance skills you think are the best. Let's flip over the coin and take a look at whether you think there's one of the major party leaders whose performance skills are not quite ready for prime time or as much as they should be. Okay, Kathy Brock, start us off on this round.
The person who I found a bit disappointing was Andrea Horwath. And part of it was she was interrupting all the time. She was called out a number of times by both of the moderators, and she used anecdotes too much. People have heard her say that in the past. What we needed to hear from her was, how are the NDP going to fix things? What are they specifically going to do? And I think she was weaker on that. But generally, she was very argumentative and didn't appear to be happy or like she had fire in the belly.
All right, just to remind everybody that we can go beyond the leaders' debate in making these judgments. So, Karen Stintz, come on in here and tell me, leaders' debate, campaign announcements, scrums with reporters, meeting with individual members of the electorate, whose performance skills seem not ready for prime time in your view?
Well, I would agree that Andrea Horwath is having a very difficult time resonating with the general population. I think that she and her party are the official opposition because in the last election, there was so much discontent with the Liberal Party. But I don't know that she'll be able to hold on to the role as official opposition because fundamentally she doesn't resonate well. I think she has not been able to create a narrative around what the NDP has achieved in the last 4 years. I think that Doug has successfully branded her as the one who always says no. Whether that's true or not, I think that that's resonating. And I think that throughout the campaign, she hasn't been able to shed the image that she has been anti every initiative that's come forward by the government. She hasn't put forward anything, that positive platform that would help change the narrative that she's just been against everything. So I think that in spite of her years in the role and her years in public office, she hasn't found her footing yet to be able to write her own narrative around who she is and what her party will bring to the table.
Lynn Whittam, what's your view?
Well, I agree with my colleagues about Andrea Horwath's performance, but I'd also like to speak about Stephen Del Duca, whom I found he accomplished what he needed to do, according to Google Trends, during his discussion. A lot of people looked him up on Google to see who he was, but his message was bureaucratic, if nothing else. It lacked emotion. He talked about his policy. He talked about, I have a plan, I have a plan, I have a plan. And we remember who had a plan in 2016, and that didn't work out very well for Hillary Clinton. So his more or less bureaucratic message, which was also echoed in all his tweets today, didn't resonate for me, and I don't think it would have resonated well with the audience. He's telling people to go somewhere else to learn about who he is and what he's doing. And so I think that lack of emotion undermined his performance.
Martin, could you follow up on that? What was your impression of how Stephen Del Duca has done performing throughout this campaign?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. He's brand new to this role. He's been doing months and months of debate prep to get ready for this moment, for this 90 moments. I've heard endlessly from Tories and New Democrats about their focus group testing showing that Del Duca tests not just badly but terribly, that women don't like him, that they don't like his look, his sound, his laugh, his this, his that. I don't know. I never try to, I always take that kind of report and research with a grain of salt. Focus groups depend on what the clip is and how it's framed and so on. And I also never extrapolate from myself or my friends as to how people show up on TV. So I don't know. I think he did the best that he could do with his style. He's not emotional. He scores very low on the emotional quotient. I think that's a challenge for him. So he tries to convey competence. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing. Here's my website. I'm not sure that's a bad thing to do. Everyone does that now. Donald Trump, Barack Obama, everyone refers people to their website. It's a way of conveying that I really have the information. Meanwhile, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it in shorthand. I did talk a little. I jumped the gun. I didn't know you were going to ask about weak performers, so I did talk a little bit about Andrew Horwath already. Let me just say one thing about Doug Ford, because you asked about the campaign trail. It's interesting, this folksiness thing that he does. I call it sometimes faux folksiness because he does overdo it sometimes, but it's very effective at certain when he's on his game for some people. And this morning he once again used this phrase I heard several months ago where he said he was talking about a serious subject, racism, and he was saying this is a problem that arises when the cheese slips off the cracker for people. I mean, I don't know. It is a bit of a shtick. It's a bit of a routine that I think he puts on, but so does Andrew Horwath. The two of them are always using the word folks, everyday folks. Mm-hmm. But it's a vocabulary that they are trying to instill in their campaign rhetoric, and I think Doug Ford pulls it off better than Andrew Horwath, who doesn't always sound, when she talks about everyday folks and she's talking about her tax freeze on people earning up to $200,000. Mike Schreiner called her out in that, and it's hard to say that everyday folks are really who are earning $200,000. Maybe they're actually a little bit above everyday folks in income levels.
Well, they're actually, technically speaking, the 1% in Canada. If you make north of 200,000, you're in the 1%. You're not an everyday folk. That's just a fact. Okay, let's, you know what? Let's show some clips now. And I want to get you folks, there we go again. I want you experts to weigh in on what we see here. Let's start with Doug Ford. Here's a clip of him getting it done. Okay, Sheldon, let's roll this, please.
Let me tell you, I just love this part of my job, getting out and visiting the people, getting out of the bubble of Queen's Park and listening to the real people and their concerns.
Okay, I don't know if people at home can tell, but every single one of those words he just said, he read off a teleprompter. And Kathy Brock, I want to know what you make of the fact that 4 years into his premiership, Doug Ford is still incapable of making any announcement at any time without a teleprompter.
Steve, I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. People do want the leaders to speak without notes, etc. But if a premier slips up, if a premier makes a mistake on a fact, people are going to slam him and they're going to repeat it again and again and again. So it's better that he play it a little safer and that he stick to his script because he knows that. He also does it well because he believes what he's saying. He's reviewed these notes, it would appear, because he speaks from the heart. And yes, he sometimes is a little too folksy, but on the other hand, people kind of feel that's a bit of a warm hug at a time when they're going through difficult times.
Karen, what do you think of his reliance on the teleprompter?
Well, I think he's learned from past mistakes that he needs the teleprompter. Because I remember he had gone out to give this big announcement. I think it was on the Northern Ring of Fire and how he was so excited about it. But there was still the license plate issue that was plaguing him. And he got through his press conference and it was pitch perfect. And then at the end, he just couldn't help himself. He had to go after one of the reporters who asked him about the license plates. And it derailed the entire message that he was trying to give, because that became the news for the next 5 days. So I think after that moment, he realized and his team realized he needs the teleprompter. He needs to stick to the script. When he sticks to the script, he does very well. Even when he's folksy and he misuses words and he overuses phrases, he's still more authentic. But in order for him to be effective, he needs to stay on message. He cannot go off script.
Lynn Whittam, what do you say?
Well, I think being able to perform with the teleprompter is a very important skill. I'm not sure he's that great at it because the teleprompter makes some of the things, some of the references, the anecdotes, the alliteration sound a bit wooden. So in the debate last night, when he talked about the economy under the Liberals' leadership going downhill like the Canadian bobsled team or toboggan team, one of those, to me, it sounded pretty contrived. And I know that's the clip that people are picking up today. However, it seemed wooden to me. And that's because he's not a great rehearsed presenter. The teleprompter requires certain skills to be able to sound natural and authentic. And I don't think he achieves that.
You won't be shocked to hear, Martin, that Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader, doesn't think much of Mr. Ford's use of the teleprompter. And here is what he has had to say numerous times about that. Here's one example of him on the hustings talking about that. Sheldon, the clip, if you would.
When a premier of this province needs to read a script repeatedly that others have written for him, when he's thinking about how he's governed and where he wants to take the province, and by the way, you know this, Doug Ford does this every day of the week. Reading someone else's words isn't something that speaks to me in a genuine way, and I don't believe the people of Ontario believe it does either.
Fair point, Martin?
Yeah, I think it's a relevant point. I don't think it's a decisive factor for folks. I think journalists find it interesting because we are scoring, we are rating, and we are trying to assess how much they believe what they're saying, how much they can think on their feet. So for us, it's an interesting indicator. I think for a formal speech to NATO or to the Bank of Canada or to economists, it's okay to have a teleprompter, to have a prepared text, by the way. But when you are, television folks use television folks use teleprompters too. What's interesting is his excessive reliance on it and the contrast between when he gives his prepared remarks to a news conference and then he goes and answers questions. So it's kind of two different Doug Fords that you're seeing. So sometimes that contrast can be jarring. There's another leader who uses a teleprompter quite a bit, not as much after 13 years as leader, and that's Andrea Horwath. I mean, I asked our team, because I can't be everywhere, I try to watch every day, but our reporters on the scene are kind of keeping a teleprompter watch. And Andrea Horwath uses a teleprompter a fair bit too, or to the point she reads from her notes almost every question that she asks in question period. I find that a little odd. I would have thought you can kind of master the material by now, or at least a question after all those years. So Del Duca is making fun of this. He's mocking this. He happens to have a pretty good memory. From what I can see, he never uses a teleprompter. It's possible the Liberal campaign can't afford a teleprompter because they are running a lean and mean campaign. But he spoke to reporters for 70 minutes when he did his campaign launch. That's a pretty long marathon news event without referring to notes. So Mike Schreiner, the same. He doesn't use notes or teleprompters. Again, probably they can't rig that up every time. Do I think that viewers notice it? No. Do I think the journalists who cover these reporters notice it? Absolutely. And it kind of influences the way a reporter who's only human judges the competence of an authenticity of a leader.
Well, this is what I'm wondering, Lynn. Do you think voters give Del Duca marks for the fact that he can get up there and talk about his costed financial plan for 70 minutes without once using a teleprompter or looking down at notes? I mean, the guy's got his brief down pat.
I think Martin's absolutely right. It's not a threshold. It's not an important issue. I think Del Duca is trying to make an issue out of it, but I don't think people really care that much. Where it does, I think, influence a voter and the media that channels the information to the voter is when things don't seem authentic. And so the teleprompter and Ford, I know he's folksy and wonderful, but a discerning audience, a discerning voter might say, is that real? For Martin, who mentioned that it actually comes across as a bit too folksy, that's that lack of authenticity. And I think it comes from a lack of performance skills or being able to speak from the cuff in a way that isn't terrifying for his handlers.
Well, let me pick up on one thing Martin said a moment ago, and that is the ability of all of them to, quote unquote, think on their feet. And as we move into the next part of our conversation here, one of the things that the leaders always have to watch out for on the hustings is this sort of late-breaking development that they are not aware of. And it happened last Thursday to Stephen Del Duca when he was at his press conference and he was told by the Star's Rob Ferguson, your colleague, MRC, that one of his candidates in southwestern Ontario had said some pretty awful things on Facebook about gay people and women. He said it when he was a teenager. And well, let's just play some of this. Here's Rob's question and the leader's answer. Sheldon, if you would.
Were you aware of this, or is anything being done? Just asking in the wake of yesterday's candidate trouble.
Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of that, Rob. So what I will commit to right now is taking a close look at this immediately following this event. And if, in fact, the allegation is true, I can confirm that candidate will not be standing as an Ontario Liberal Party candidate. I think it's really important for leaders to take decisive action when candidates, when candidate behavior that is irresponsible, that is reckless, that is not what we stand for, is dealt with in the most decisive way possible. So I will take a look immediately following this event, and if that is the case, then that individual will no longer be a candidate for us.
Karen Stintz, I'm betting in your time running for office, you have been at press conferences where reporters have surprised you with questions about information you were unaware of. How do you think Stephen Del Duca handled himself in that situation?
I think he did well because he acknowledged that he didn't know about the matter and he said he would look into it, which is really what the only response you can give is. But I thought he nicely pivoted back to his values and his value statements around what he would accept or not accept in a candidate. So in that instance, I think he did quite well.
Kathy Brock, what do you say?
I would say he did well, Steve, because he showed leadership skills. He showed that he could make decisions, but he also showed the weakness that Stephen Del Duca has, and that is he went to the intellectual answer, the bureaucratic answer, as